Welcome back to the Keeping the Dream Alive podcast. Today I have the opportunity to sit down with Clay Hagan, who has been on the podcast a few other times, and talking about one of Torch's recent distinctions that happened in 2024 about being a public benefit corp. So I'm excited to have you on today. Clay, talk about what is a benefit corporation.
Thanks for having me, Clark. Glad to be here again. So a benefit corporation is a designation where you actually change, I think it's the articles of incorporation, and you embed in that some covenants, so to speak, some commitments, some priorities, some things that you value. In our case, those are basically, I think the first one is to be, in a profitable company for 100 years, right? So it's easy enough to say that, but in effect, whether that had been 500 years or 20 years, the key thing was long-term. Do things that are making sure that you can survive, not just, betting on the come. And if this goes, we're going to have this great multiple, but being fiscally responsible and government responsible and community responsible, all those things that create longevity. And you say, why would that be important? Well, as an ESOP, we're owned by a retirement plan. We're owned beneficially by our employees. And, the risk with any company is you go out of business. You go out of business, you end up doing things that take the company down. You hurt a lot of people. In an ESOP company, you hurt a lot more than just yourself. So that's obviously an extremely important part of it. We value employee ownership or broad-based, ownership. ESOP structure, as far as the current rule set, has not even been around 100 years. So you look at our next two, and one of them is that we're committed to employee ownership, across there. And you'll notice that where we change those things, we do have to be in compliance currently with the ESOP, but it's more in compliance with the principles of employee ownership. So that could morph and change over 100 years or 200 years or whatever. And we want to stay current on that and currently in compliance, et cetera. The other part is we want to give back to the employee ownership culture and community. So whether that be, training at NCEO, which is the National Center for Employee Ownership, or the ESOP Association, we want to encourage our employee owners to go out and speak, to get involved in committees, to get, to help out other companies to, somebody asks a question, how do you implement it? Well, give them access to, to yourself, to other people, help that occur, because we don't operate in a vacuum. We're not the only company that does this, and we certainly can learn from others and they can learn from us, and we want to expand that. And then fourth is your community. And so, giving back to the community. If community has helped you grow and helped the employee ownership that you have and the company grow, then we should give back to the community. You want to live in a place that's safe and prospering, with that. But you'll notice in all those things, we haven't put a metric on that. And that's because when you actually start thinking long-term, you can't say X percent needs to go back to, to a charity. There could be a time in which our profits are down or other things in the economy. And maybe those years, volunteerism is the way you give back. We do feel there will always be an opportunity, a method by which that the then employees and then management team can find to give back to their communities. But we didn't want to dictate that one formula that works today would also work 75, 100 years from now.
Yeah. And, the ESOP, not all ESOPs, end up being a benefit corp. It's not something that has to happen. But for Torch, the steps, it was kind of, it wasn't just an overnight thing. You had to change a lot of the the bylaws and everything that's associated with the ESOP currently. How long was that process from, hey, we kind of want to look at this being something that we eventually do, to like, hey, this is actually in place and it's happening?
So in reality, that was probably about an 8-year process. So we looked at it, particularly when Delaware, which is where we're incorporated. Most companies are incorporated in Delaware. The majority of the companies in the U.S. are Delaware. There's a few states that have really good corporate organization laws that attract a lot of companies to do that. In Delaware, I don't know if it was 2015, 16, something in that time frame. had become like the 26th or 27th state to then allow public benefit corporations. And so that really opened it up for us. The problem was that Delaware was very hesitant about that. So they had made the rules, and I may get this wrong, but I think it's right, where you had to get 90% of your ownership had to agree to incorporate this new language into your articles of incorporation, which would therefore govern, what the board of directors does. Gives them some guidance, some principles, some things to anchor to that makes your company different and that you value. Delaware did put it to where you decide what those are going to be. And that was important to us. We didn't want to just take, a formula where different companies, for example, a company that produces a product, may have environmental impact, whereas a company that produces a service has a different, thing. So you don't want to take somebody else's concerns, values, and apply it where it doesn't apply. So that was attractive to us. The 90% was a huge hurdle. We were already 100% employee owned. The question becomes, well, could the trustee, who's technically the owner of the shares, be the one to do that? And there was some advocacy that, well, the trustee would have, one vote, that'd be 100%. The problem with that means that the trustee changes their mind, they're 100% to go the other way.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't feel right. Those that are the beneficial owners, that representative of the company should be on board with it if we were going to do it. And you also, to unwind, you had to have a supermajority as well. Well, Delaware did that, and that went for a couple of years. And you can imagine there's companies that originally just owned by one person before they become an ESOP or before they make a change. Because we were looking at those that were ESOPs that were doing this. That owner would have 100% of the vote, so he could say, "Here's the values I want to, put in the corporation before I turn the keys over, via the ESOP, with that." So the 90% hurdle was not a big hurdle if you're the single owner. So there was plenty of companies that did it and thrived, to where those employees got motivation of that, sense of being, sense of belonging, sense of impact, and they felt like they exceeded, the performance they would have had otherwise. So Delaware saw that, and they changed the laws and said, I think you just have to have 2/3 instead of 90%. And
when did that 2/3 come into effect? Prior to being 90% and then going down to 2/3, I mean, that probably opened the door for a lot more people. Was that in the last few years that kind of then pushed y'all to actually make the distinction?
Yeah, so that 2/3 was probably 5 years ago.
Okay.
So we had looked at it 7 or 8 years ago. Bill had me present it to the board of directors. Bill had went to a conference or a talk at NCEO. I think Aziz might have been the who is our current evaluator, by the way, but Aziz might have been one giving the talk on the positive financial benefits of a benefit corporation. Basically giving people more meaning and purpose in their life and in their employment, and in their being with a company, and how he had seen that actually be a positive. Because you could view it from an evaluator standpoint as saying, okay, that's a drain on resources. So it was intriguing to have, a national known evaluator advocating for it. So we presented it to the board, probably 7-8 years ago, did a refresh when they changed it to the 2/3, because that seemed more doable. There was some track record with that. But it really wasn't until right at the beginning of the pandemic that Delaware changed it yet again. And they had so much success with it and so much demand for it, it became 50-50. So in order to achieve the change to become a public benefit corporation, you had to have 51% of the vote, the ownership to do it. Or if you wanted to unwind, you wanted to say, I'm no longer going to be that, 51%. And so that's where Bill looked at, okay, it's changed a lot. And we've been watching a lot, and we wanted to do it. Are we going to do it or not do it? And even with that, the trustees are hesitant. So it's still very rare, particularly in the ESOP space. It's not non-existent. There's plenty of companies doing it, but it's not. I think we're the first one in Alabama, and the first one certainly in Huntsville. Has an ESOP to be a public benefit corporation. So it's a fairly rare thing. And you have the whole how are you going to determine what those values are going to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think, I think what's interesting too, and we didn't mention it on the ESOP episode we did recently, but since Starfish is sort of the parent of all of the companies within Torch, Freedom Real Estate, Torch, and everything like that, that ESOP is effectively for everybody, as well as that public benefit corp. So not only are you having to look at Torch employees for that 51%, you're having to look at Freedom employees. You're having to look at, I would assume, everybody that's underneath the umbrella of Starfish.
Yes, yeah. So by the time we got around to doing it, like you're right, we had Starfish, involved there, and it was some debate on Freedom, Starfish, Torch, because in reality, all three of those are incorporated, differently. And I want to say an LLC. There may have been some nuance there with Delaware law, and I don't think Freedom is incorporated Delaware.
Okay.
So Freedom has a commitment that as soon as Alabama allows, the Public Benefit Corporation for an LLC, that they will do that. The fact that Starfish and Torch, are now Public Benefit Corporation, and particularly Starfish, there's no risk there that there was a small nuance of the actual incorporation of Freedom not being out of Delaware.
Yeah.
So I don't want to put any doubt out there, with that. The most important one was Starfish, and then obviously as far as from the massive employee base, it's Torch.
And so a big part of you mentioned in sort of that those four pillars of being a public benefit corp is that community giving, and that community giving back to the community, if that means monetarily with some, hey, here's a donation, or hey, with our time, or whatever it might be. How has the community giving changed with being a public benefit corp, and has it changed?
I would say it really hasn't changed as a direct result. It kind of put in some longevity that it should outlast, leadership changes and leadership retirements. Because to say that Torch, both at corporate giving, of course, Torch Helps can do it anyway, and that Torch has been a company that gives back to the community for the entire time. So it isn't like all of a sudden we did this and now we've got to go do something we haven't been doing. That's not the case. We may have increased it some, but the key part is going to be every 2 years or every year, whenever the reports come out. And I think Tammy's going to be working on a report this spring, to report back to the employees, here's what we've done to fulfill, the values we put into the Public Benefit Corporation. The big part of that's going to be what feedback do we get from the employees. If we're doing too much, it's incumbent on the employees to send back and say, okay, maybe we scale that down. If we're doing too little, maybe we scale that up. Or what are creative ideas of other things that could have more effectiveness or impact that maybe don't cost as much? Because every epoch of time, every 10 years, every 20 years, the then employees and the then management team have to figure out, are they doing this the way it feels right for them at that point in time? And that's the big dynamic of it is, it's not to hit the ball out of the park the one time, and then a personality leaves, or a person that was driving it leaves, and all of a sudden it collapses down to do very little. We have to hold ourselves responsible or accountable. And so that feedback will be very important, for the company to say, what is the current ecosystem that feels right on those four topics. Yeah.
And I mean, I think, as if you've probably seen it being a part of Torch for, 20 years now, 20 plus years now, that culture is a big part of it. And the Public Benefit Corp plays a direct hand in making that culture. And as we talked about it, as employees, in the next 5 years and in the next 5 years start retiring that maybe helped build that culture, being able to address it and then, look back and say, hey, what have we done the last couple of years? What do we want to do the next couple of years? And making sure that y'all are able to continue that thread that at which you intended it to be 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Is there, as you're, having, obviously this is a pretty new distinction as being a public benefit corp. I think it was earlier in 2024, maybe,
Yep.
was when it actually occurred. Is there a question, or is there something that you would hope, if anyone takes away from this, that they know about a public benefit corp and they know how it affects them as an employee here at Torch?
Probably the largest impact that it had is it took all the rumors pretty much off the table that we were for sale. This made a definitive statement. It's part of our incorporation, change for that. We only needed 50%. We had put a hurdle above that, before we were going to do that. It turns out we basically got 90%. I think it was 89.6% or something. So the vast majority of our employees, and it's important to know that when this was put in place, we both counted one head, one vote, and we counted, one share, one vote. So we got right at 90% of the ownership said, let's do this. And 90% of the employees said, let's do this. So what that means that those people that are new in their career at Torch, that don't have a lot of ownership, yet, voted consistently with those that are nearing retirement and have a lot of ownership, because both of them matched. We had no clue that was going to happen. We were hopeful. But what that communicated to the outside world of those those folks that thought, okay, well, I'm just going to go buy Torch or whatever, culture and purpose and meaning is the only superpower a company really has. And, the employee ownership helps to build that up and fortify that. The Public Benefit Corporation helps protect that with those principles. But it's incumbent upon the people to keep that, and it doesn't affect everybody. I mean, there's plenty of people that are here to draw a paycheck because they got skills from a college degree and we needed that college degree. That's all fine. But for those that want more, being able to achieve that, both in purpose and ownership and value, that creates the staying power.
And you mentioned, you're not in a vacuum. It's Torch is here to help in ways in which employees can give back if they want. What are some direct, initiatives that Torch has to help employees make those things possible?
As far as initiatives, that's a good point. Initiatives, in order to be able to give back, certainly there's always a call for people to be on Torch Helps or Torch in Action or Steps. Get involved. Get involved in something. We also, what's less known is we don't always fill the speaker for ESOP Association events or NCEO events and that kind of thing. And so if you have an interest in that, applying for that. On the technical side, if you create a paper, you create something, we're going to help you present that at a conference, and that's, little known sort of thing, but it also takes a lot of work on somebody's part. Certainly, further yourself, from an education standpoint, but from an involvement in associations, get involved, not just inside Torch. We still encourage people, bring your ideas and create something brand new in Torch, and whether that be, in a satellite office, a local office, corporate headquarters, it doesn't matter. Get involved, make something different, do something better. You own this company, act like it.
Yeah. And I think that's an exciting thing. And we've had other episodes. So if you're listening and you want to learn more about any of the Torch Helps and stuff like that, we've actually done some episodes on that. So you can learn a little bit more of the nuances and what makes that different and kind of the structure of that. But I appreciate you being here and talking a little bit about Public Benefit Corp. It's exciting to see this distinction, and it's exciting to see what the future looks like for Torch being an ESOP, 100% employee owned, and now being a Public Benefit Corp. Thank you so much for being here.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you, Clark.